All right, taking refuge and generating bodhicitta. I go for refuge until I am enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the merits I create through listening to the Dharma, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. Sangye chodam ki chodam la janchu bardu dani kyapsu nagi chanyengi pe sonam ki rola penchir sangye drupal Sangye chodam soki chodam la janchu bardu dani kapsuti Nagi chanenge pesonam ki rola penchir sangye drupa shok. Let me just move that over. Apologies for the clumsiness. His Holiness advises reciting the following prayers prior to a commentary of the way of the Bodhisattva. Abandon evil doing. Practice virtue well. Subdue your mind. This is the Buddha's teaching. Like a star, an optical illusion, or a flame, a magical illusion, a dewdrop, or a bubble. Like a dream, a flash of lightning, or a cloud, so should one consider all compounded things. While reciting these words, we should reflect on the impermanence and the lack of reality in phenomena and conclude with a prayer of dedication. By this merit, may we attain omniscience and overcome our enemy, our own harmful deeds. And may beings buffeted by the waves of birth, old age, sickness, and death be liberated from the ocean of existence. Next, we should recite the Heart Sutra, the praise to Manjushri, and the offering of the mandala. The Heart of the Perfection of Wisdom Sutra. I prostrate to the Arya Triple Gem. Thus did I hear at one time the Bhagawan was dwelling on Massive Vulture's mountain in Rajagriha, together with a great community of monks and a great community of bodhisattvas. At that time, the Bhagawan was absorbed in the concentration on the categories of phenomena called profound perception. Also at that time, the Bodhisattva, Mahasattva, Arya Avalokiteshvara looked upon the very practice of the profound perfection of wisdom and beheld those five aggregates also as empty of inherent nature. Then, through the power of Buddha, the Venerable Shariputra said this to the Bodhisattva, Mahasattva, Arya Avalokiteshvara: how should any son of the lineage train who wishes to practice the activity of the profound perfection of wisdom? He said that, and the Bodhisattva, Mahasattva, Arya Avalokiteshvara said this to the Venerable Shariputra: Shariputra, any son of the lineage or daughter of the lineage who wishes to practice the activity of the profound perfection of wisdom should look upon it like this, correctly and repeatedly beholding those five aggregates also as empty of inherent nature. Form is empty, emptiness is form. Emptiness is not other than form, form is also not other than emptiness. In the same way, feeling, discrimination, compositional factors, and consciousness are empty. Shariputra, likewise, all phenomena are emptiness, without characteristic, unproduced, unceased, stainless, not without stain, not deficient, not fulfilled. Shariputra, therefore, in emptiness, there is no form, no feeling, no discrimination, no compositional factors, no consciousness, no eye, no ear, no nose, no tongue, no body, no mind, no visual form, no sound, no odor, no taste, no object of touch, and no phenomenon. There is no I element, and so on, up to and including no mind element, and no mental consciousness element. There is no ignorance, no extinction of ignorance, and so on, up to and including no aging and death, and no extinction of aging and death. Similarly, there is no suffering, origination, cessation, and path. There is no exalted wisdom, no attainment, and also no non-attainment. Shariputra, therefore, because there is no attainment, Bodhisattvas rely on and dwell in the perfection of wisdom, the mind without obscuration and without fear. Having completely passed beyond error, they reach the end point of nirvana. All the Buddhas who dwell in the three times also manifestly completely awaken to unsurpassable, perfect, complete enlightenment in reliance on the perfection of wisdom. Therefore, the mantra of the perfection of wisdom, the mantra of great knowledge, the unsurpassed mantra, the mantra equal to the unequaled, the mantra that thoroughly pacifies all suffering should be known as truth, since it is not false. The mantra of the perfection of wisdom is declared. Tayata, Om Gate Gate, Paragate, Parasamgate, Bodhi Soha. Shariputra, the Bodhisattva Mahasattva, should train in the profound perfection of wisdom like that. Then the Bhagawan arose from that concentration and commended the Bodhisattva Mahasattva Arya Avalokiteshvara, saying, well said, son of the lineage. It is like that. It is like that. One should practice the profound perfection of wisdom, just as you have indicated. Even the Tathagatas rejoice. The Bhagawan, having thus spoken, the Venerable Sharadvati Putra, the Bodhisattva Mahasattva Arya Avalokiteshvara, and those surrounding in their entirety, along with the world of gods, humans, asuras, and Gandharvas, were overjoyed and highly praised that spoken by the Bhagawan. Now, praise to Manjushri. Homage to my guru and protector, Manjushri, who holds in his heart a scriptural text, symbolic of his seeing of all things as they are, whose understanding shines forth as the sun, unclouded by delusions or traces of ignorance, who teaches in 60 ways, with the loving compassion of a father for his only son, all creatures caught in the prison of samsara, confused in the darkness of their ignorance, overwhelmed by their suffering. You, whose dragon thunder-like proclamation of Dharma arouses us from the stupor of our delusions and frees us from the iron chains of our karma, who wields the sword of wisdom, hewing down suffering wherever its sprouts appear, clearing away the darkness of all ignorance, you whose princely body is adorned with the 112 marks of a Buddha, who has completed the 10 stages of achieving the highest perfections of a Bodhisattva, who has been pure from the beginning. I bow down to you, Manjushri. Om Rapasanati. With the brilliance of your wisdom, O compassionate one, illuminate the darkness enclosing my mind. Enlighten my intelligence and wisdom so that I may gain insight into the Buddha's words and the texts that explain them. Outer Mandala. Sajipati Kushimito Prahamri Rablinji
Nidempadi
Sange
Sange Jindu
Mite
Mite Uwagi Kokunamajina Chopashok.
The inner mandala. Please enjoy and bless me and all sentient beings to be released from the 3 poisonous minds. For I am offering without attachment my body, enemies, friends, and strangers, and all possessions which are the objects of my greed, ignorance, and hatred. Mandala offering for requesting teachings. O holy and venerable Lama, from the clouds of compassion that form in the skies of your Dharmakaya wisdom, please release a rain of vast and profound Dharma, precisely in accordance with the needs of those to be trained. Idam
Idam
Mandala
Mandala Thank you very much. So we're going to jump right in. Time is very precious. I'm going to quote Geshe Doga. Geshe Doga says, I've heard comments that the Bodha Charyavatara is an easy text to teach. I personally feel that it is not that easy at all to teach this text thoroughly. One needs to have a broad understanding of the Lam Rim teachings, the Majjhimaka teachings, the mind training teachings, as well as a good understanding of the tenets. End of quote. So I mention this not to sort of drown us in concern that we're swimming in over our depth, but really to give permission, if you like, to fully embrace the scale of the task ahead of us in approaching this text. Certainly, we might solve the issue of complexity, as we so often do, by skimming through Shantideva's text, or one might say skating over Shantideva's text, relating each verse to some little portion of our experience, a sort of immediately knowable experience. But this would be, I think, to miss the entire thrust of Shantideva's composition, which is for us to fully embrace the task of becoming engaging bodhisattvas and all that that entails. I want to propose, therefore, that we fully honour the expansive richness of Shantideva's text, which lays out in exquisite detail and with logical cohesion the real overriding task, our task, which is to become fully enlightened for the benefit of all sentient beings. In his training compendium, and I just show you this, it's actually a very splendid translation by Charles Goodman. This is one of the three absolutely precious texts known to us to have been authored by Shantideva, and it's really a scriptural anthology gathered around the, if you like, all the issues dealt with in the Guide to a Bodhisattva's Way of Life. So it's the perfect scriptural accompaniment to our current text. So just to give an example of how extraordinary it is to utilize this text while approaching our subject. In his training compendium, Shantideva gives us a beautiful and quite remarkable quote from the Casket of Jewels Sutra. And you'll see at a glance that it's apropos what I've just been mentioning. To quote, Manjushri, it is like this, for example, a baby sparrow that is still inside the enclosed space of an egg has not broken through the egg and does not come out from within, but it still produces the call of a sparrow. Manjushri, in the same way, a bodhisattva who is still inside the enclosed space of the egg of ignorance and who has not broken through the view of self and who has not come out of the threefold world, lets loose the call of the Buddhas, which is this: emptiness, no characteristics, and no aspirations. So that's on page 8 if you want to check it in the translation. So this unborn, but already very active baby bird, ensconced in its protective shell, is intended as none other than an analogy for ourselves in our current position. We're not quite born yet, Bodhisattvas. We are pending, as it were, ready to go, burst out and spread our fledgling wings. I think it's the most beautiful image, isn't it, for us to consider. And even unborn, this is the incredible essence of this quote, we are already in discourse, concourse, communication with the Buddhas. We are responding already to their call, and they are also responding to ours, the little tiny cheeping that it might be. Our realizations, in other words, that will ripen as full enlightenment, are forecast or prophesized even at this early stage of being a unborn baby bird. Now, just to sort of put another layer of kind of significance on this beautiful quote, it is true that baby birds do chirp inside their shells prior to being born. So this isn't fiction. This is quite true. Here in Australia, for example, we have magpies, highly intelligent, highly social birds who sing to their baby birds inside their shells. Elaborate birthing songs, we have to say. And it's thought that when those little fledglings, appear out from their shells, they are already equipped with a kind of repertoire of language in the form of song that they would not have been able to learn in those first few moments or days of life. So this is really an extraordinarily beautiful image, I think you'll agree. In other words, they've already acquired a significant vocabulary prior to breaking out of their shells. So the last part of the quote is referring to the 3 doors of liberation. In other words, it's describing the realization of ultimate reality of all things: emptiness, signlessness, and wishlessness. Wishlessness is the emptiness of phenomena from the point of view of it not being produced by not being an inherently produced effect. Signlessness is the emptiness of a phenomena from the point of view of its not having been inherently produced from causes. And emptiness is referring to the emptiness of the entity itself. So realizing these 3 is to achieve the perfection of wisdom, the only means when conjoined with ultimate bodhicitta of unlocking our Buddha potential. So as His Holiness says, quote, understanding of dependent origination, and with it understanding of emptiness, ensures achievement of high status, good rebirth, and definite goodness. End of quote. So it's also the intent of Shantideva's famous statement in the first verse of the 9th chapter, Wisdom, where Shantideva says, all these branches of the doctrine, the powerful Lord expounded for the sake of wisdom. Therefore, they must generate this wisdom who wish to have an end of suffering. So in the light of this, it would seem very timely that we're now up to verse 17 of the first chapter, which contrasts the aspiring mind with the engaging mind in terms of the merit amassed by each. It also beseeches us to step beyond attachment to the great fruits of cyclic existence. So the verse is, although great fruits occur in cyclic existence, verse 17, from the mind that aspires to awaken, an uninterrupted flow of merit does not ensue, as it does with the venturing mind. So I think this verse is self-explanatory. Shantideva similarly makes the same point in the training anthology, and I quote, "You should not despise the awakening mind, even if it is not accompanied by practice." So he's referring to aspiring bodhicitta here, because it still produces endless endless happiness within cyclic existence. The awaking mind is beneficial even without practice. So again, we've got this incredible forecasting of the power of that little tiny bird who hasn't yet been able to do any actions in the world because it hasn't been born, but it's already bearing this incredible accumulation of merit that's going to definitely thrust us into circumstances where it can certainly accomplish such wonderful engagements. So this acknowledged, the verse does set up a comparison between the relative capacities of aspiring and engaging bodhicitta, as Greg Pagelsing in his commentary says, and we've got a copy of that in PDF form. Just as has been said, the mind that wishes enlightenment will give rise to the great fruits at the time of abiding in cyclic existence. However, it will not give rise to uninterrupted merit, as is the case for the merit arising continuously from the engaging mind. So in general, we can say that the extraordinary extensive capacity of both aspiring and engaging bodhicitta is due to the fact that we're concerned not just for one, but for all sentient beings' happiness, and their number is limitless. So our field of observation is limitless. Additionally, we're not concerned just for their temporal or short-term happiness, but for their ultimate happiness, which is limitless. Hence, the merit we accumulate in facilitating this is incredibly vast in both cases, but with the engaging mind, it is vast in the additional sense, as Shantideva is pointing out, that it will flow in an uninterrupted and continuous fashion, so that it will be as pervasive and as vast as the sky. So it really helps to know, as Shantideva notes, that this verse refers principally to aspiring bodhicitta. It describes the accumulative potential, particularly to the great fruits at the time of abiding in cyclic existence, whereas the next two verses capture the scale of engaging bodhicitta, referred to in Batchelor's translation as the venturing mind. I think we can say that it's venturing in the sense that it has committed to not just aspiring, but to undertaking. It is actually setting forth. Shantideva is stressing how the merits that arise from this have an enhanced force corresponding to the immense power of this engaging in active engagement, which arises, as you will recall, concomitantly with the aspirational thought. So to quote verses 18 and 19, "And for him who has perfectly seized this mind, with the thought never to turn away from total liberating the infinite forms of life, from that time hence, even when asleep or unconcerned, a force of merit equal to the sky will perpetually ensure." So given this, why would we not engage? We early quoted His Holiness, and I quote again, this last week, "From the moment the vow is taken, whatever a Bodhisattva does, whether waking or sleeping, will create great merit simply through the sheer power of the intention. And if there is great merit in wanting to relieve one being of a single discomfort, need one mention the endless benefit of wishing to help innumerable sentient beings." End of quote. Thus, we're being invited to consider the potency and the significance of taking vows, and especially taking bodhicitta vows on the supremely developed or matured base of engaging. As Tsongkhapa says, quote, once you have taken the vow, the spirit present is the engaged spirit of enlightenment. He also says, those who have taken the Bodhisattva vows have no choice but to learn the Bodhisattva's deeds. And even those who have not adopted the engaged spirit of enlightenment through its ritual strive to inculcate a desire to learn the deeds. Thus, engaged spirit of enlightenment through its ritual strive to inculcate to learn the deeds, thus increasing the force of their enthusiasm for learning them. Then, when they take the vows, their vows will be extremely stable. So make an effort to do this. Geshe Doga, in his commentary to verse 19, somewhat wryly riffs. He knows us all too well, quote, but it is important that we don't misinterpret this. It doesn't mean that once the pledge is made, one does not need to further develop that engaging mind. Bodhisattvas still need to train to further develop that altruistic state. So, end of quote. If we've somehow managed to reach that threshold where we intend to engage, in that we're finally fully resolved to do so, it would be most foolish indeed to just let matters sit there, acquiesce on the spot of our new virtue. This is not the purpose of taking vows at all. They are not something like trophies to be held aloft. Rather, they are marvelous gateways to dynamically effective practice. They are vehicles for radical transformation. Speaking of the efficacy of vows in general, Pabonka Rinpoche says in Liberation in the Palm of Your Hand, quote, two people may live together and one of them may have taken a vow not to kill while the other has not. Both of them may equally not kill the whole time, but the person without the vow does not receive the virtue that comes from abandoning killing, whereas the virtue of the person with the vow will increase every day. Thus, someone who has not taken any vows does not create these special root virtues. Contrast this with someone holding vows who every day sees an increase in virtue and profits greatly, end of quote. So Pabonka then illustrates this statement that I've just quoted with a quote of verse 19 from Shantideva's guide. And so it's really showing you how incredibly revered this text is. It's built into so many of our Guru's commentaries. So by way of further securing these points regarding the two verses, Dragpa Galtson says, quote, the wishing mind merely seeks the result of unsurpassed enlightenment, nothing more. The engaging mind is conjoined with the activities accomplishing the six perfections, the complete causes of Buddhahood, end of quote. So again, this conjoining with the activities, not just engaging, but accomplishing the six perfections, which embody the complete causes of Buddhahood, is the reason for engaging bodhicitta's relative superiority. It's utterly inexhaustible, continuously uninterrupted flow, whether awake or asleep. So very inspiring, isn't it? Verse 20, for the sake of those inclined towards the lesser vehicle, this was logically asserted by the Tathagata himself in the sutra requested by Sabahu. For this, in second line, in this context, is a continuation of the description of limitless, endlessly flowing virtues just under discussion. Regarding the meaning of the opening two lines, which are for the sake of those inclined towards the lesser vehicle, this was logically asserted, Gen Doga quotes Gyaltsabje, that it is valid that the engaging mind has these benefits was established by the Tathagata himself in the sutra requested by the Bodhisattva Sabahu with reasoning. End of quote. So the reasoning or logical assertion, as it's translated in Batchelor's text, involves appreciating that the threefold analysis by which we can apply a test of whether or not a quotation is valid. So this is very worth keeping in mind. So the first criteria, an object doesn't have to fulfill all three because they're distinct, but it has to fulfill one. Obvious phenomena are not contradicted by direct valid perception. Secondly, slightly obscure phenomena are not contradicted by valid inference based on the force of evidence. An example of slightly obscured phenomena would be impermanence, selflessness, and so forth. And thirdly, extremely obscure phenomena are not contradicted by valid inference based on scriptural authority. Examples of extremely obscure phenomena would be the subtleties of karma, and indeed the reach of the merit produced by an engaging or a aspirational bodhicitta mind. So in our case, the measure of the benefits of the engaging mind would appear to be an example of an extremely obscure phenomena, hence the validating appeal in Shantideva's verse to scriptural authority in the form of a reference to a specific sutra. So in general, Gendoga, following Gotsabje, also notes that the reference to those inclined towards the lesser vehicle, which is the first line of verse 20 in our translation, addresses those not yet committed to the Mahayana. They are wavering, perhaps floating indeterminately, as it were, having not yet decided which way to turn. Hence, Shantideva's appeal to reason or to logic gently proposes that they might like to take a decisive step towards the great vehicle, given its just declared unimaginable virtues. But in general, we must allow that there are three vehicles, and each is valid and is entirely suitable for beings to practice, as all will eventually result in a single ripened result, enlightenment. And this presentation is according to Prasangika. So there are tenet differences on these issues, but I'm presenting the Prasangika position. So we must also acknowledge that there's an implicit, meaning inbuilt, evolutionary scheme or momentum in the very serial structure of the three scopes as presented in the Lamrim, which are corresponding to the three vehicles. And the purpose of this graduated serialism, if you like, in that presentation is to encourage the practitioner to move in an continuously upgrading fashion towards the highest goal. So this was the Buddha's purpose, in fact, in teaching different vehicles and different tenet systems for that matter. They are said to be like the stepping stones of a ladder, leading invariably to the highest view, to the highest goal. So if, out of self-righteous pride, we were to denigrate any practitioners on the so-called lower vehicles, we would in fact be breaking a Bodhisattva vow, namely belittling those who follow Hinayana, the 14th vow. If we also reject the sacred literature connected to the lower vehicle, because we consider that a higher vehicle's literature would be superior, we're also committing another root breach of our Bodhisattva vow, that of the fourth vow, which is criticizing the scriptural teachings of Hinayana. It is deeply demeritorious to do so because they are the authentic word of the Buddha. This is a karmically serious matter indeed, because we would be coaxing these practitioners, enticing them to step away from a valid, virtuous path together with its authentic scriptural supports, thereby exposing them to the risk of their abandoning their former ethical practice and thus being prone once again to creating the causes to be thrown into the lower realms. It's interesting that the 14th vow, and if we're looking at the vows in detail, is actually broken at that moment when the recipient of our recommendation that my vehicle is to be abandoned, it's inferior, when the recipient relinquishes the vehicle in their own mind. So it's not the thought that it's superior and telling them that it's a breaking of the vow. It's when the recipient actually changes their mind due to our interference. So this shows you the karmic implication of our act. So in other words, their change evidences that our belittling has worked. And it's this working of our belittlement in real time and space, if you like, that has accomplished the actual vow's loss. So these are important concerns to bear in mind. Otherwise, we might incline towards sectarianism. We might even become agents causing others to abandon their Dharma practice entirely. And will we be sticking around to pick up the pieces? So moving now to verse 21 and 22, if even the thought to relieve a living creature of merely a headache is a beneficial intention, endowed with infinite goodness, then what need is there to mention the wish to dispel their inconceivable misery, wishing every single one of them to realize boundless good qualities? So this is rhetorical. Gyaltsab Sabje places these two verses under the very meaningful subheading, great benefit, because of the infinite applications for virtue. So an example of an infinite application of virtue here, as indicated in the last line of verse 21, would be to relieve a single being of a headache. Juxtaposing the locality of a mere single headache of just one individual to the inconceivably vast ocean of miseries suffered by innumerable sentient beings illustrates the pungency of Shantideva's poetic power. And in an important sense, it gives us a bouncing board for our own fledgling bodhicitta practice in terms of a sharply focused and sensitively nuanced practice. For example, and this is an example of the kind of outcome of reading these verses in terms of our daily practice. Now, example I came up with, but it's sort of obvious, I think. Next time we become aware of someone with a headache, and it can even be us, we use it to catalyze, trigger our practice of Tonlin, which epitomizes the bodhicitta attitude. Thinking, through my seeking to relieve this headache of one sentient being, may the entire physical and mental sufferings of all sentient beings, right this instance, ripen upon me. May they thereby be without physical and mental suffering and proceed without delay, without obstacles, to the city of everlasting happiness and joy. Please, precious Buddhas, bless me so that this might be so. So this is a sample of an infinite application. It's infinite because we can apply it to everything if we start to think this way. And in Lama Zopa Rinpoche's beautiful book, The Bodhisattva Attitude, he gives incredible examples like we walk through a doorway. Well, we don't just walk through a doorway. We say maybe walk through the doorway of liberation in order to be able to turn around and rescue our suffering mothers. So just stepping through a portal in this way, as we're climbing a flight of stairs, as we're descending into the basement of a building, may I go down to capture even the last of the cell beings and bring them to a higher rebirth and then lead them to full enlightenment. May all the negative karmas resulting in hell rebirths ripen upon me right now as I descend these stairs. And as I ascend them again, may I carry all sentient beings up with me and take personal responsibility for them. So you can see here how this is really talking about engagement in an incredibly palpable and real way. So due to time restraints, I'll now simply read out the remaining verses of chapter 1, and I'll only stop at several points for comments. This is appropriate, I think, as they are composed to reinforce points already so eloquently and strongly made. They are further supportive illustrations, in other words. They drive even deeper the essential points. So I now read, starting with verse 23, do even fathers and mothers have such benevolent intention as this? Do the gods and sages, does even Brahma have it? If those beings have never before ever even dreamt of such an attitude for their own sake, how would it ever arise for the sake of others? This intention to benefit all beings, which does not arise in others even for their own sake, is an extraordinary jewel of the mind, and its birth an unprecedented wonder. How can I fathom the depths of the goodness of this jewel of the mind, the panacea that relieves the world of pain and is the source of all its joy? If merely a benevolent intention excels venerating the Buddhas, then what need to mention striving to make all beings without exception happy? Although wishing to be rid of misery, they run towards misery itself. Although wishing to have happiness, like an enemy, they ignorantly destroy it. This is verse 28. I'm going to read out the Padmakara translation. For beings long to free themselves from misery, but misery itself they follow and pursue. They long for joy, but in their ignorance destroy it as they would a hated enemy. So this verse, I'm going to comment on this verse, it has a very important meaning, and it's therefore frequently quoted in our precious Lama's teachings, because it precisely captures the perverse manner, I'm using the word perverse deliberately here, in which sentient beings, including ourselves, are totally confused in their approach to procuring happiness. In the very process of so avidly, so compulsively seeking it, via extraction from the world of sensory pleasures, as it were, they unwittingly produce the perpetuation of the very suffering they're endeavouring to overcome. Why? Because they don't know the Dharma. They don't even understand the problem. Moreover, their ignorance is not just a passive unknowing, like a fog obscuring the contours or the shape of a mountain. Rather, this ignorance is an active form of distorting, deforming reality via a constant projection of its own fabrications, which are then mistakenly read back as the way things really actually are. They are grasped as real, in other words, in the very way that they are appearing. Hallucination is mistaken as reality. As Kabje Zopa Rinpoche says, inherent existence is not the nature of the object, but it is what we believe is the nature of the object. We believe it is inherently existent, The object appears to our hallucinated mind, but in reality, it is not there. It's totally non-existent, empty. End of quote. In other words, ignorant beings cannot even begin to realistically measure the extent of their ignorance because they hold on to what appears to their bewildered mind as truly existing out there where it appears to be, dwelling from its own side, existing in its own right, already accomplished from where it appears, as it were. The result, our false view, is reifying things to have an objective status within themselves, in and of themselves, independently of any other phenomena. So this self-grasping saturates all of our ordinary appearances so thoroughly that its operations can't be seen. Hence, in Buddhism, we refer to our ordinary mental appearances as veiling truths, or truths for an obscurer. An obscurer of what? Of suchness, the actual mode of reality of things. At the same time, we're also blithely ignorant of the law of cause and effect, and this has to be emphasized just as much. And therefore, we act without concern for the actual consequences of even a small, non-virtuous act, such as crushing an insect underfoot, just because it happened to be there. We see it, we lift our foot, and then with a downwards movement, crush. Why? I witnessed this on a tram. We have trams in Melbourne. I witnessed this at a tram stop a couple of years ago while I was waiting for the tram, and there were a couple next to me, and an insect came and they went crunch. And I was shocked. It was just going about its daily business. This poor little insect on a piece of concrete in the middle of an urbanized cityscape somehow managed to cling to life, only to meet this incredible end under the heel of someone who, for whatever reason, saw movement as a trigger to kill. So, as the story of Upalavana illustrates, and I quote this very famous verse, he eats his father's flesh and hits his mother. The enemy he killed sits on his knee. A knife gnaws her husband's bones. Samsara can be such a farce. So to understand this verse more deeply, we need to have a broad grasp of the operation of the 12 links of interdependent origination, as well as comprehend more fully the nature of samsaric suffering. For example, what we call happiness is actually the suffering of change, etc. We also need to understand the four truths, and particularly how suffering has a cause, and that only by the exact anecdotal removal can suffering be overcome. Therefore, we engage a path capable of doing this. In other words, we need to have a thorough understanding of the meditations involved in the first two Lam Rim scopes, paying particular attention to the explanation of suffering in the middle scope, together with the mechanisms or strategies for overcoming it, for nothing else will suffice. So we're still referring to these verses of Shantideva, where beings are perversely creating the causes of suffering. In his commentary on these verses, Gendoga asks us to pay particular attention to the lower scope when approaching it. And he says, due to ignorance, in the verse, specifically refers to being ignorant of what righteous things to adopt and what negative things to discard or abandon. This presentation relates particularly to the practices that are presented in the small scope of the Lam Rim teachings. This is, of course, my personal interpretation as to how specifically as to how this this definitely relates to the small scope. More specifically, ignorance refers here to not knowing how to adopt virtues, such as the 10 virtues, and how to shun or abandon the 10 non-virtuous deeds. Overcoming that ignorance is the way to stop creating the causes for one's own suffering. This teaching is not really all that difficult to understand, end of quote. That it is not so hard to understand, I would want to add, is not to say that it is widely understood, and certainly even more rarely applied as a skillful methodology to obtain happiness, even ordinary happiness, let alone ultimate happiness. So it's surely then a great tragedy, if not also a travesty, one plaguing the condition of sentient beings. It is like the emperor's new clothes, but on a cosmic scale. Certainly in terms of the Lam Rim, we need to practice those practices in common with the being of lower capacity in order to secure the very favourable samsaric conditions we require to secure a precious human rebirth, without which there is little prospect of being able to practice or proceed to anything higher, such as working to address the root of samsara, etc. So this is the implicit message of this verse. Geshe Jumpa Gutso makes the same point concerning ignorance in the context of it particularly pertaining to not knowing what to adopt and what to discard in terms of our performative behaviour. He says, although they wish for happiness due to the afflictions in their mind, they create non-virtue, which is the cause of suffering. Due to this, they are unable to become free from cyclic existence, whereby not only is it beginningless, but also endless. Their minds, ignorant and confused about what to practice and what to eliminate, respectively, the causes of happiness and the causes of suffering, they engage in mistaken methods. In other words, although they wish for happiness, they engage sorry, I've lost my way here. Though they wish for happiness, they engage in mistaken methods to obtain it and thereby create the cause of suffering. This is due to the ignorance that does not know the virtue of what is to be adopted and non-virtue that is to be discarded. Because sentient beings are ignorant of the causes of happiness, they remain deprived of happiness and instead experience much suffering. Therefore, to take the essence of these verses, it is a matter now of us conscientiously guarding our three doors of body, speech, and mind. Shantideva will explore these methods extensively. For example, chapter 4 on conscientiousness and chapter 5 on guarding alertness. Without conscientiousness and discriminating alertness, we cannot hope to guard our mind and thus keep ourselves and others safe from harm. So I now move to verse 29 onwards. For those who are deprived of happiness and burdened with many sorrows, it satisfies them with all joys, dispels all suffering, and clears away confusion. Where is there a comparable virtue? Where is there even such a friend? Where is there merit similar to this? If whoever repays a kind deed is worthy of some praise, then what need to mention the Bodhisattva who does good without it being asked of him? The world honours as virtuous a man who sometimes gives a little plain food, disrespectively to a few beings, that satisfies them for only half a day. What need be said then of one who eternally bestows the peerless bliss of the Sagatas upon limitless numbers of beings, thereby fulfilling all their hopes? 34. The Buddha has said that whoever bears an evil thought against a benefactor, such as that Bodhisattva, will remain in hell for as many eons as there were evil thoughts. 35. But if a virtuous attitude should arise in that regard, the fruits will multiply far more than that. When bodhisattvas greatly suffer, they generate no negativity. Instead, their virtues naturally increase. So I think particularly these last two verses, require a little commentary, as otherwise it might be confusing or even alarming to consider. The point is that a bodhisattva is not an ordinary being. They are karmically potent objects. This is because even at a germinal stage, they have the capacity to help and support countless others, protect them from harm, offer all kinds of benefit, etc. We earlier gave the examples of other potent objects in relation to the 5 heinous crimes in relation to verse 13. To despise or disparage or ridicule or belittle bodhisattvas, even unwittingly, in that one does not recognize them as bodhisattvas, bears a particularly heavy karmic weight, and it leads to a proportionally intensely grave karmic consequence. But, as Shantideva is also saying, to support and admire that same bodhisattva, even without knowing that they are a bodhisattva, perhaps we'll witness them appearing as an ordinary person, for example, rescuing a child from a flood, and admire them for their bravery and kindness, results in the accumulation of vast positive fruits that likewise will extend and ripen inexhaustibly over vast lengths of time and in all kinds of conditions. This is because the bodhisattva is such a powerful holy object, irrespective of whether or not we comprehend that. So these two verses must be read as kind of symmetrical, antithetical reflections in a way. One's on the positive pole and the other's on the extreme end of the negative pole. And the bodhisattva's the common object being viewed differently in the center. So I'd suggest here that the bodhisattva's very presence acts as a kind of karmic magnifying lens, if you like. It's the same situation as when we criticize or disparage our guru. This topic is further explored in commentaries on the Bodhisattva and Tantric vows. So I just mentioned that. The 50 verses of guru devotion include some very, very vivid points about these very issues. So we must appreciate that we're not dealing with the situation, the fault. It has nothing to do with the guru's response to us. It is a matter of what we do from our side. Geshe Nawandagi says, quote, "If your guru's name is Rinchen Dorje, you may refer to him when speaking to others as my spiritual master, his presence, the holy, venerable Rinchen Dorje. At least some respectful titles must be used. It is extremely crude, arrogant, and grating to address, refer, or to write about your guru using only his personal name. He is not your childhood playmate, but a Buddha leading you to enlightenment." So is the Bodhisattva. On this point of disparaging the Bodhisattva, His Holiness says, "It is said that to think negatively about such a Bodhisattva has extreme, serious consequences. We should therefore take great care to protect ourselves from this sort of fault and consider others as our teachers." And that others is an open others, by the way. And we should never, without any specific reason, point out other people's faults. As the omniscient Gendun Drugpa said, "Be grateful to all beings and regard all practitioners with pure vision. Subdue the enemy within," end of quote. "Let us follow his advice," end of His Holiness's quote. So might I suggest that the point here is that we cannot, because we cannot reliably or evidentially tell who is and who isn't a Bodhisattva, at least at our current level of perception, or what we might call karmic vision, our level of karmic vision, we would be wisest to desist, as His Holiness is recommending, from thinking negatively about or disparaging anyone. Remember that a Buddha or a high-level Bodhisattva can manifest as a bridge, a rabid dog, a demented person, a tattered beggar sitting in front of a tub of live fish and then plucking them out and roasting them live one by one, and then put them into his mouth while snapping his fingers. This is a reference to how Naropa encountered his tantric guru, Tilopa. When Tilopa snapped his fingers, he was transferring the fish's consciousnesses to a pure realm. But Naropa, due to the limitations of his karmic vision, saw a ghastly beggar performing acts of horrendous immorality in that place. So the question is, could Naropa move past the tyranny, the domination of ordinary karmic appearances to pure appearances, pure vision? This is what His Holiness is asking us to do. This is, after all, the tantric transformative challenge. As Gendon Drugpa suggests. So the point is, to sort of boil all this down, Tilopa was magically setting Naropa a trial. Likewise, next time an aggressive person pushes us aside in a supermarket aisle and we generate anger in a flash, and if we have lax gun laws, we might pull out a gun and even shoot them dead. Or do we graciously make space for them and delight in their fortune at not having to wait much longer? So Tsongkhapa explicitly addresses these issues in the great treatise in relation to the perfection of patience, as indeed does Shantideva in his famous 6th chapter on patience. And yeah, so I'll leave that there. So Tsongkhapa deals with expands this topic to consider roots of virtue in general. He says, in general, for there to be a destruction of the roots of virtue, it is not required that the anger be towards bodhisattvas. The Compendium of Training says, the text of the Arya Savasthavadins also says, the Bhagavan said, monks consider a monk who makes a full prostration to a stupa that contains a Buddha's hair and nails, and who has an attitude of faith. So be it, Reverend One. Monks, this monk will experience reigns as a universal monarch 1,000 times the number of grains of sand, 84,000 leagues under the ground his prostrate body covers, down to the disc of gold that supports the earth. Then the Venerable Upali, who was located off to the side from where the Bhagavan was seated, bowed with hands joined respectfully and asked, the Bhagavan has said that this monk's roots of virtue are so great. O Bhagavan, how are those roots of virtue used up, diminished, erased, and extinguished? Upali, when such a sin as malice is done towards fellow practitioners, it is like a wound or maiming. I cannot see its full impact. Upali, this diminishes, erases, and extinguishes these great roots of virtue. Therefore, Upali, if you do not feel malice towards a burned stump, what need to mention feeling that way towards a body with consciousness? So Tsongkhapa then elaborates what is meant by diminishing, erasing, and extinguishing great roots of virtue in this case. I won't explore that further here, but it's in the great treatise, volume 2, pages 155 to 156. So a similar passage is found in Illuminating the Thought. Being angry towards a bodhisattva, insulting them and disparaging them out of a negative motivation are described in the compendium of sutras as limitless in terms of their ill consequences. Furthermore, the consequences are the same regardless of whether one has recognized one's object to be a bodhisattva and whether one's grounds for being angry are valid. It's very challenging stuff, isn't it? In view of this, we must strive with all our efforts to prevent anger in general and to prevent anger directed towards those who engage in monastic life as well as towards bodhisattvas. End of quote. So the last two lines of verse 35, therefore, via what we might call a vivid, even violent juxtaposition, indicate how a bodhisattva responds to difficult situations in precisely the opposite manner. And the lines read, when bodhisattvas greatly suffer, they generate no negativity. Instead, their virtues naturally increase. So the experience of suffering, even great suffering for that bodhisattva, is a cause of virtues naturally increasing. In our case, however, when we're faced with great suffering, we're in real danger of our non-virtues naturally increasing. We are instantly, it seems, surrendered to their thrall. As Tsongkhapa says in Illuminating the Thought, quote, the instant it arises, wrath disfigures your face and leads you to do what is unwholesome, and it robs your mind of judgment that helps evaluation what is right to do and what is wrong to do. This intolerance, anger, is swift to throw you to the lower realms. So contemplate these ill consequences, and with the thought, I will never give an opportunity to anger, prevent anger. So the last verse of chapter 1, 36, I bow down to the body of him in whom the sacred precious mind is born. I seek refuge in that source of joy who brings to happiness even those who harm him. So I feel that this last verse requires a little annotation, as it really encapsulates the points made earlier regarding homage, paying homage to the triple gem, and our own need, our personal need to seek refuge in that same source of joy in order to cause our own young bodhicitta mind to flourish and grow. In other words, we're being invited to emulate and follow in the Buddha's footsteps. This wish to emulate involves recognition of our own Buddha nature. This Buddha nature, in other words, must be mapped onto, in the sense of superimposed upon and then absorbed into, the vast expanse of the Buddha's mind, which is, after all, the manifestation of the ripening of our own potential. Our own Buddha mind is that manifestation. We must realize that the nature of our own mind and the nature of the Buddha's mind is, in this sense, fundamentally the same. As His Holiness very movingly and beautifully says, meanwhile, we neglected the precious jewel of our beautiful Buddha nature. opting to wallow in the mud of samsara. Considering that the nature of the Buddha's mind and the nature of our own mind is the same, what a pitiful situation we have allowed ourselves to remain in. Meanwhile, the jewel of our Buddha mind has been lying unnoticed in the mud too long. We must appreciate and respect this jewel, clean it, and put it on top of the canopy of awakening where its radiance will shine everywhere. What a remarkable line that is. I'll read it again. Meanwhile, the jewel of our Buddha mind that has been lying unnoticed in the mud too long, we must appreciate and respect this jewel, clean it, and put it on top of the canopy of awakening where its radiance will shine everywhere. And His Holiness continues, let's gather together the force of all our joyous effort and do it. In the process, may we never be ungrateful for the Buddha's teachings. Unfolding the true beauty of our Buddha nature involves aspiring to awakening for the benefit of all sentient beings, so that we may give rise to this illustrious mind that is the cause of all happiness and nirvana. So the canopy of awakening is none other than Bodhi, Jangchup, the observed object of our Bodhicitta mind. As verse 25 said, and you'll recall this, it is an extraordinary jewel of the mind and its birth an unprecedented wonder. So rejoicing is indeed in order. And again, as the last verse says, I bow down to the body of him in whom the sacred precious mind is born. I seek refuge in that source of joy who brings to happiness even those who harm him. Those who bear within themselves the mind of bodhicitta are an inestimable source of joy and utterly worthy of homage, our homage, because the sacred precious mind of bodhicitta is within them. This is their perfect qualification because of its extraordinary qualities. For example, someone endowed with it will seek to bring happiness even especially to those who seek to harm him or her. Rather than damage or annihilate them, they will work to skillfully and perfectly bring them, even their enemies, to perfect bliss. So they use that opportunity of the attack to do their bodhisattva work. It's the perfect karmic engagement, vital engagement, that can definitely provide the basis of this extraordinary benefit. So the Padmakara translation of this last verse says, to them in whom this precious sacred mind is born, to them I bow. I go for refuge in that source of happiness that brings its very enemies to perfect bliss. Dragpa Geltsen illustrates, he says, the Jatamala, Garland of Birth Stories, speaks of the Kalika king who cut off the limbs and secondary limbs of the Bodhisattva Shantideva. At that time, not only did the Bodhisattva not generate anger, but he was set in the truth. In the birth story of King Matrabala, Power of Love, even though the 5 yakshas drank the blood from his body, he was eventually set in the state of an Arya. Likewise, not only does a Bodhisattva who has been harmed not retaliate, he brings only happiness. I seek refuge in that source of happiness. So again, we gain the profound impression that our object of refuge here is that precious mind itself, not just the bearer of it. This interpretation would coincide with Chandrakirti's famous homage at the start of Entering the Middle Way, which is, he makes to great compassion. He says, I will praise compassion at the start of all. So as Chandrakirti says, and this is my quick paraphrase, compassion together with non-dual cognition as well as the awakening mind are together the causes of bodhisattvas, and Buddhas are born from bodhisattvas. So by paying homage to the mind that generates these causes, we're paying homage implicitly to all. That's the point being made. So we're now in a position, can you believe it or not, to move to chapter 2. And it's called The Disclosure of Evil. Geshe Yeshe Topten encapsulates its content. He says the second chapter discusses refuge, the purification of negative karma, and the acknowledgement of negativity, hence the title, The Disclosure of Evil. We must acknowledge our negative karma before we'll be able to purify it. So there are many major matters here to consider as we move forward. Other commenters introduce this chapter by stressing the imperative carried in the first stanza. For example, Dragpa Geltsen makes it clear that having generated the two minds, referring to aspiring, engaging bodhicitta, we are now to earnestly train in the deeds of the six perfections, starting with the perfection of generosity. Why? In order to seize the immense advantages of this precious mind. So here, if we stop to consider, we'll recognize that Geshe Yeshe Topten and Geltsen Dragpa are in fact saying the same thing, because the task, if I can use that word, of the bodhicitta mind to put an end to most of our suffering by eliminating its causes. I'll say that again. Yeah, they're both saying the same thing, because we're getting to the point of needing to uproot the causes of suffering in sentient beings and to give them all benefits. And so whether we look at this from the point of view of having to perfect our own ethical basis, or whether we use it to enhance our engagement with the six perfections, we're actually talking about the same thing. It amounts to the same thing. So in other words, we must dynamically reach and seize this bodhicitta mind. And so we have the opening verse, in order to seize that precious mind, I offer to the Tathagatas, to the sacred Dharma, the stainless jewel, and to the children of the Buddha, the oceans of excellence. So His Holiness, the Dalai Lama, invites us to consider the following point when beginning to investigate this second chapter. He says, before taking the vow of a bodhisattva, we should bear in mind what it is that we're aiming at and how we should proceed. We then recite the 7-branch prayer with our thoughts directed to the ideal of bodhicitta. The first of the 7 branches is homage. So this is what we're paying here in this first chapter, a verse of the chapter. So the significance of Shantideva first paying homage can be appreciated in terms of its role in preparing us for taking the vow itself, which formally takes place in chapter 3. So we're sort of moving closer and closer and closer to actually taking the engaging bodhisattva vow ourselves. So we have to kind of clean up our act now to get there, in other words. So this verse is pointing out that, I'll leave this bit out, I think. So another point here is that we have to break out of our usually clenched tight fist of our self-cherishing attitude. One has not only vehemently ignored the suffering plight of others, but we've even worked against their welfare and happiness. So by practicing not just generosity, but the perfection of generosity, we'll directly oppose this fundamental selfishness that constitutes the cause at the core of our usual modus operandi. As Alex Berzin eloquently puts it, the 6 far-reaching attitudes are states of mind that lead the way to liberation and enlightenment. As antidotes to some of our biggest mental obstacles, anger, greed, jealousy, laziness, and so on, the 6 attitudes work together, enabling us to deal with everything that life throws at us. By developing these attitudes, we can slowly but certainly realize our full potential, bringing the highest benefit to ourselves and others. So, a perfection in Sanskrit is paramita, and it indicates the virtue or quality developed and practiced by a Bodhisattva on the path to becoming a Buddha. Buswell and Lopez in their Buddhist dictionary point out that, quote, the term is glossed by some traditional commentators as gone beyond or gone to the other side, although it seems, in fact, to derive from the Sanskrit prama, meaning highest or supreme. So this second interpretation, and both are essential and valuable, is useful here as it points to the manner in which our practice of giving, for example, becomes a practice of the perfection of giving when we perform it on the basis of the precious mind of bodhicitta. So Shantideva is going to lay out how we practice giving in the verses that follow this initial verse. So it's very useful here to consider that the perfections are said to be increasingly difficult to practice as one moves from one to the next. They become increasingly hard to perfect, in other words, and we perfect the first ones first and the second ones second for that reason. And that is why the Shantideva is now emphasizing how we practice generosity, because it is on our current basis possible for us to do. How wonderful is that? Indeed, we see the same structure in Shantideva's Madhyamika Vatara. Of all the perfection, the Arya being excels becomes unsurpassable in the perfection of generosity first. I mention this because I know some of you are also studying this important text. So there are some who say that a perfection does not qualify to be a perfection unless it's accompanied by a realization of the emptiness of the 3 spheres, namely the emptiness of the giving, the emptiness of the gift, and the emptiness of the recipient to whom the object is given. So I'll leave that aside for now. The crunch is that we're attempting to continually upgrade our motivation and deeds so that they increase more and more until they assume the status of the peerless motivations and deeds of a bodhisattva, one who's on the grounds and who is no longer to be considered an ordinary or mundane being, nor are their actions to be considered ordinary or mundane. We're sincerely seeking to emulate them, in other words. As Geshe Sonam Rinchen says, these practices are called perfections because they are practiced by bodhisattvas with a supreme intention of attaining enlightenment for the sake of all living beings. A perfection surpasses other practices in the way that exalted beings surpass ordinary beings. The way, the ultimate surpasses the conventional. Nirvana surpasses cyclic existence, and understanding surpasses nescience, or not knowing. In his commentary on this verse, Dragpa Geltsen frames how we're to motivationally think as we embark upon our practice of generosity in the context of a beginning Bodhisattva. He says, in order to uphold that precious mind from which all the virtuous collections of all sentient beings arise, to the Tathagatas, to the Supreme Dharma Jewel, Mahayana true cessations which are pure by nature and without adventitious stains, and true paths which are without the stains of the appearance of true existence, and to the Sangha Jewel, the children of the Bodhisattvas, the great oceans of excellent qualities, such as Lord, Arya, Avalokiteshvara, and Manjushri, I make excellent offerings of the environment, such as auspicious offering substances, inestimable mansions and groves, its contents, such as gold, silver, precious ornaments, cloth, and grains. And besides these, by way of my body, my pure attitude, my 3 roots of virtue, and motivated by the mind of enlightenment, the preparation of making prostrations and circumambulations with my body, expressing the excellent qualities of the objects of offering with my speech, and thinking of all the excellent qualities of abandonment and excellent qualities of realizations with my mind. End of quote. So, of course, making a supplication in this way is to flow up from the very depths of our heart. So Shantideva proceeds now to poetically and very sensually, very beautifully, and very extensively describe what is to be offered. And in this way, we're being trained ourselves to make the most auspicious offerings. So in terms of the seven branch practice, as His Holiness mentioned, this is the second branch after homage, making offerings. But before jumping in further, I'd just like to do a little bit more framing of the chapter. So Geltsabje, in his outline, subsumes the content of chapter 2 under 4. Offerings, 1. Prostrations, 2. Refuge, 3. Confessing of negativity with 4 complete powers, 4. And he further breaks the topic down, and I'm just going to refer to the first here. Offerings, which is the first of the 4, has 2 subheadings: the need to make offerings and the actual practice of offerings. So we're currently dealing with the need to make offerings. Geshe Doga gives a precise account. He says the Tibetan words for offering is chopa, which comes from the Sanskrit word puja, and it has the connotation of pleasing the minds of the gurus, the Buddhas, and the deities, such as Tara and so forth. So when we imagine that the object of one's offering is pleased, we are making the actual offering. For our own sake, making offerings is to be understood as the antidote for overcoming miserliness. So I think this is obviously very valuable, and it emphasizes 2 essential purposes of offering, or the need to offer, which is that it pleases the minds of the gurus, the Buddhas, and the deities. And this is the actual offering. The promoting the pleasure itself is not the object offered, but the actual delighted receipt of the offering, if you like. And it helps us to overcome miserliness. So I think we're now in a position to move on to the qualities of our offerings. which is going to enable us to perform the actual act of offering. So there's a number of criteria here, and they're very necessary to keep in mind. The first is we have to be free from deceit on a causal level, which means that our offerings, for example, shouldn't be stolen. They shouldn't be acquired through extortion, through begging, via manipulation. They should be free of deceit on a motivational level, i.e., free of the 8 worldly concerns, because these would taint the objects themselves. So 8 worldly concerns, as we know from our thought transformation teachings, are referring to gain and loss, praise and blame, fame and dishonor, pleasure and pain. Such pure, untainted motivation is not easy to generate, you'll agree. These prerequisites are extensively presented in the Lam Rim. For example, in his presentation of the preliminary rites, Pabonka mentions giving in order to receive is giving some trifle. Trifle is a good word, isn't it? Receiving some trifle in order to receive something better. This is a good example of a polluted gift. We give a little slice of cake because we reckon we'll get the whole bun. Hinting is telling your benefactors things like, I like tea and butter at the moment, but I don't have a great, I have tea and butter at the moment, but I don't have a great deal of grain, in the hope of receiving a gift. Deceitful motives is making offerings out of a desire for fame or to impress others. As Drogon Rinpoche says, and this is still Pabonka Rinpoche's quote, even offering you make to the 3 jewels, even offerings you make to the 3 jewels are done to be seen by others. So we might call this strategically conspicuous public sponsorship. How many of our, I just sort of throw this in for good measure, how many of our big corporate companies indulge in such like to render their image benevolent and squeaky clean? Holding the giant check, for example, to pay for children's cancer research, and where they hold up the giant banner check for the news, while the cameras zoom in. Of course, donating to cancer research is a wonderful and important thing to do, so that's not the question. But from a Bodhisattva's perspective, such a practice of giving will not qualify as a perfection of giving because tainted by self-interest, some sense of personal gain, or company gain in this case, corporate self-interest. In his commentary, Gyaltsabje says, verse 1, one respectively makes offerings in thought and action in a wholesome way with exalted objects. So the word exalted here lifts them beyond the scope of being polluted or stained. Just as important as making a correct offering is the correct identification of the objects, the recipients to whom we offer. In our current case, and talking about the context of this chapter, we're not offering to the King of England or the President of the United States or the winner of this year's Academy of Best Actress, Academy Award of Best Actress. We're offering to the holy refuge objects themselves. As Gyaltsabje says, as one makes offering to the Tathagatas and the holy superior beings, and also to the holy Dharma jewel, the Mahayana truth of cessation that is free from adventitious stains, on top of being naturally pure, and the truth of the path is the object of offering. The ocean of qualities that are the children of the Buddhas, such as the superior Lord, Avalokiteshvara, Manjushri, and others are included as well. So I think you'll agree we've dealt with these issues of the qualities of the Triple Gem at the beginning of chapter 1. But Shantideva here is asking us to consider how our quality of giving is tied to our perception of the significance and the meaning of the holy objects to which we're giving. Of course, both reinforce the other. For example, we aim quite naturally to make the very finest transcendental offerings to the highest transcendental holy objects. So we can therefore appreciate how Shantideva is carefully building upon what he has presented before. He's now taking the refuge objects in their exalted status, which is so strongly reinforced in the first chapter, as the fulcrum to explore and develop our own ability to practice the perfection of generosity. So Geshe-Doga refers to this kind of precision in Shantideva as meticulous. And Geshe Tobten notes, we address the three jewels in order to create merit, but we must also make offerings and dedicate our virtuous actions to all sentient beings. These beings must certainly be the objects of our love and compassion. So the point here is that in making all of our offerings focused upon the holy refuge objects, we're not in any way forgetting that we're doing that on behalf of suffering sentient beings. In fact, that's the whole essence of why we're performing those actions. So I just wanted to quote a story here, which I think exemplifies a sort of conceptual problem we can make. A student on one particular occasion, Geshe-Doga was talking about the power of offering to the Buddhas in dealing with this section of Shantideva's text. And a student from the back of the Gompa spoke up and said, Geshe-la, I find this really, really, really hard to understand. It seems to me if someone is on the street starving, you're saying I should leave them there and offer my beautiful fruit to the holy Buddhas instead. Shouldn't I be offering it to the starving sentient being? Great question. And Geshe-Doga, with his customary precision, but also wit, answered by saying, what you do, addressing the person who asked the question, is give it directly to the person who is starving, accompanied by the thought that in that act you're making the offering to the holy refuge objects. The point being, of course, to elaborate, they're not mutually exclusive. They're perfectly bound together, aren't they? So Shantideva now presents the actual practice of offering, and in Gyaltsabje's system of outlines and subheadings, it comes under the subheading, the coming verse come under the subheading, offering substances that are not owned. So I'll read those verses. 2, whatever flowers and fruits there are, and whatever kinds of medicine, whatever jewels exist in this world, and whatever clean, refreshing waters. Likewise, gem-encrusted mountains, forest groves, quiet and beautiful places, heavenly trees bedecked with flowers, and trees with fruit-laden branches, fragrances of the celestial realms, incense, wishing trees, and jewel trees, uncultivated harvests, and all ornaments that are worthy to be offered, lakes and pools adorned with lotuses, and the beautiful cry of wild geese, everything unowned within the limitless spheres of space. So I think we need to unpack a little bit this reference to offering everything unowned. It might prove puzzling. How are we to offer something that we don't personally own. Actually, to think in this way, to have this quandary, is perhaps no more than a failure of the reach of our imaginations. Gendoga indicates, quote, "These are the best offerings for those of us who feel that we don't have much to offer." When we think about these lines of the verse, we find we have no shortage of offerings. So His Holiness also very briefly proposes another reason that makes offering things unowned, another reason for offering things that are unowned by us. He proposes that those things are karmically connected to us in any case. He says, when we talk about offerings that do not belong to anyone else, such as all the beautiful landscapes in the world and all the different universes that have no owner, at first glance, they may seem to have nothing whatsoever to do with us. What is the use of mentally offering something we do not own? But in the Abhidharma, it is said, all world systems are the result of karma. And according to the entrance to the middle way, quote, "The infinite variety of beings and universes have been created by the mind. All universes and beings are the results of karma." And the quote, His Holiness continues, "The universe that we inhabit and our shared perception of it are results of a common karma. Likewise, the places that we will experience in the future will be the outcome of the karma that we share with the other beings living here. The actions of each of us, human and non-human, have contributed to the world in which we live. We all have a common responsibility for our world and are connected with everything in it. This is why we make an offering of it." So Gyaltsabje, in his commentary on these verses, indicates that we are not to be thwarted by some limited or constricted sense that because we're dwelling in poverty, when we're unable to practice the perfection of generosity. And he says, this quandary takes the form, because I have not accumulated extensive merit previously, I have become destitute without desirous enjoyments, end of quote. So such destitution that we might be experiencing, and we might indeed be experiencing destitution, is because we have failed to act with generosity in the past. So now is the precise time to reverse this situation. Thus, we creatively resort to mentally offering those things that we don't own. This is not a kind of lame solution for a tragic situation. Rather, we're directly addressing the situation of our own miserliness, which is, of course, a condition of our own mind. In other words, we're free, and we should feel free to offer anything in the universe or countless universes. This is really liberating, this feeling of being able to offer everything and anything continuously. We think of that sort of infinite application that Shantideva was referring to earlier. As an object appears, a beautiful flower we see as we're walking past with our dog, we immediately offer it. And Geshe Doga says, immediately offer it. We don't go home and sit on a cushion and offer it. We offer it on the very unfolding occasion of seeing it. That means we can be engaged in the practice of offering continuously, potentially. How wonderful is that? So Kabje Zopa Rinpoche so frequently emphasizes, I quote, "Many people might think that if you're offering light, it should be just a butter lamp, a candle, or an oil lamp. Thinking that you can't offer the other lights in the house, for example, electric lights is a very limited idea. Thinking that you can only offer candles is wrong. Whatever light is more clear and dispels darkness, that is the better light. So you can offer all the lights in the house. When you do a sadhana or an offering practice, you can offer those lights. By making light offerings, you're able to dispel the darkness of ignorance and achieve wisdom. By offering light, you are never in darkness while you're encircling within samsara. There will always be light. And offering light just one time to Buddha creates the karma to have great wealth for many hundreds of thousands of lifetimes. End of quote. So by extension, we can offer not just the lights in our house, but the lights in all the houses of our town or our city, of our country, of our world, of the heavens, the glittering galaxies, etc., etc. Kabje Zopa Rinpoche often asks us to include, when he's performing offering practices with us, to include all the offerings made to all the holy objects on all the altars, at the Great Enlightenment Stupa and all holy stupas. He specifically invites us to offer all the extensive objects of his own personal altar at Toss House, California, which is kept beautifully maintained by students as their core Guru Yoga practice. So indeed, we are only restricted by the scope of our current imagination. We can also offer the pure water in our glass, the pure water in all the lakes and streams, the pure nectar of the God realms, the divine nectar of wisdom, and so on. So a process of creative extrapolation is involved, in other words. And this kind of limitless scope of expansion is indicated by Shantideva's words, verse 5, third and fourth lines, everything unknown within the limitless spheres of space. So when offering flowers, one can imagine that the whole sky is filled with flowers. And this means that the merit one gains will not be limited to offering just a few flowers. Rather, it will expand to the extent of space. We can also employ the specific imaginative technology, I called it a technology because it really is a kind of technology, of making Samantabhadra offerings, as described in the King of Prayers. So I quote from the King of Prayers: with the energy of aspiration for the Bodhisattva way, with a sense of deep respect, and with as many bodies as atoms of the world, to you, all you Buddhas visualized as real, I bow down. On every atom are Buddhas numberless as atoms, each amidst a host of bodhisattvas. And I am confident the sphere of all phenomena is entirely filled with Buddhas in this way. So you can see how this exactly overlaps Shantideva's verse about limitless, extensive as limitless space. And he, further on in the King of Prayers, on one atom I shall see Buddha fields, numberless as atoms, inconceivable Buddhas among bodhisattvas in every field, practicing the activities of awakening. Perceiving this in all direction, I dive into an ocean of Buddha fields, each an ocean of 3 times Buddhas in the space of a wisp of a hair. So I too will practice for an ocean of eons. So an oral instruction related to this is often given. For example, we visualize a flower on a beam of light, being born by a beam of light, from which further light rays extend, bearing flowers, from which further light rays extend, bearing flowers ad infinitum. In Alex Berzin's words, an offering made, Samantabhadra's offerings is referring to an offering made in tantric practice in which one emanates a Samantabhadra figure holding an offering. That Samantabhadra emanates two further Samantabhadras also holding offering gems. Each of those emanate two more, and so on, until the emanated figures fill the space before one. So there's a very great purpose in engaging this kind of creative exponential expansion as an essential part of our offering practice. As Geshe Doga advises, not limiting an offering to one or two items, but making such expansive offerings is a way to amass much greater benefit from the offerings. So we might leave it there. I've covered quite a bit of ground, and next week I'm going to move on, and we're going to be able to make some more rapid progress again from time to time. So I'm still very ambitiously moving on. But I hope you can sort of see that the thrust I'm trying to approach it from a point of view of how we can apply studying this text to our own Bodhisattva practice. This is the aim of it, and it's actually the brief we have as a basic program, basic subject as well. We're trying to become familiar with the practice of the six perfections and why we should be engaged in that. And we're taking Shantideva's very, very powerful and beautiful text as a kind of basis for that exploration of practice. So rather as an academic pursuit. So I just wanted to reinforce that. So are there any questions or comments or anything you'd like to share?
Yes, Dr. Ross, this was so healing for me tonight.
Who's speaking? Sorry, Kodo.
Oh, it's Kodo.
Oh, hi, Kodo. How are you? Thank you. Yeah.
This was so healing, this expansive connected offerings that go beyond and out. It's just so, so, so healing. Thank you so much.
Oh, wonderful.
Thank you.
Yeah. When I first met Lama Kabje Rinpoche at a retreat in Bendigo, Australia, and anyway, it was a remarkable moment for me. Of course, I felt like some incredible door had opened, and I had sort of returned to something I was in danger of losing. It felt very, very familiar, but at the same time, I was full of wonder and awe. And I immediately did, Kabje Rinpoche gave teachings, and then we did a guru puja, and then Kabje Rinpoche gave the 21 Tara initiation to about, I think, 12 or 13 people, and it was a very small group in those days. And we were each bonked on the head for each of the 21 Taras, which I must say was a blissful experience. And we then did a one-week retreat at a teacher centre, and Kabje Rinpoche moved on to Chenrezig Institute and so forth, the rest of his tour of Australia. So I did the retreat and with Tara, and as I was leaving the retreat to go back to my life that I'd left prior to going on the retreat, I felt how radically different it all was for me. And I used this practice of offering that Rinpoche had described through the window of the train coming back from Bendigo to Melbourne, and then through the window of the bus in a very, very busy, overly heated summer day in Melbourne, and the traffic was so dense you couldn't walk between the cars. That was that kind of scene. But we were slowly going past all the shop windows full of their beautiful goods on display, and I was attempting to offer everything I saw as soon as I saw it to Tara as the manifestation of, the holy refuge objects. And so it was a practice that I could do straight away, and it provided an incredible continuity for me, holding on and preserving the little thread of practice that I'd somehow managed to hold on to through some miraculous ripening of a karma that must have been somewhere buried in my past by the holy guru. So I just mentioned that little thread can become a cable, an unbreakable cable. And so it's really a very, very wonderful thing to do. And there's also a physiological dimension to offering in this way for those who are suffering illness, because it's a way of releasing energy and relaxing. And I mean relaxing here, not in the trite sense of just relaxing, but we relax because our ego, our self-cherishing attitude, is no longer able to hold itself together in the face of this practice of generosity, and it melts away. And we're suddenly able to experience a kind of radical openness and a softness. I'm always intrigued when we talk about Chenrezig's power of compassion, and it's mentioned in terms of gentleness. And it's very beautiful to think that once we relieve or let go of the ego's tightness, we're opened out to the gentleness of compassion. And that gentleness is way beyond any kind of tenderness that we've been able to experience previously, even towards ourselves and even towards our sick selves, if we're ailing from a physical illness, for example, where we might feel pity and even frustration with our bodily state because we're sick and it's going to run out from under us. If we offer up our body, which is going to come in coming verses, we're dealing with the entirety of our situation in this really, really dynamic way. So Shantideva is going to plot that course for us as the chapter unfolds. So I thought to just that idea of relaxing, when I was speaking to Stephen a little bit behind the scenes, kindly Stephen's putting a lot of effort into holding things together from the sort of other side of things. And I really, really treasure that support. But for your sakes as well, he's doing that for you to help all of us together. Thank you, Stephen, and the others who are facilitating. That we have to relax about the exam for those of us who are registered for the BP program formally, in the sense that I'm not going to throw a curved ball at you and make the exam really obscure and difficult and somehow completely bewildering. I'm going to make it absolutely friendly. And I'm thinking to, if you like, siphon off some of the key questions from the weekly quizzes into a kind of short list for our study purposes. I'll do this a little bit further down the track. So instead of having to look at weeks and weeks of quizzes to think that any one of those quiz questions could be an exam question, I'm going to distill a kind of short list. And then that becomes the basis of intensive study, because there's a greater likelihood that one of those condensed questions will be an exam question. And so in this way, as we progressively move through the classes, we'll have an opportunity of moving closer and closer to a kind of an apprehension of where we need to put our energies regarding our study. So at the moment, I really want us just to relax and really relish and enjoy thinking deeply about the verses that are being under discussion. And we have an unbelievable wealth of resources. My little contribution to that is just a thimble, not even a thimbleful of what's there to us. And so I'm just trying to facilitate our access to that material, really. It's so wonderful. And it's uniquely wonderful to have this opportunity. So thank you. So we'll now dedicate the merits. Thank you, Stephen. And are you happy to lead?
I am very happy to do that for you, Ross.
Yeah.
I wanted to thank you for this class today. And certainly your words regarding the exam are appreciated. And well, you assert that it's only a thimbleful, but it's a thimbleful of nectar. Thank you. Can everyone see the dedication prayers?
It's a question of karmic vision. Oh, there we go. Yeah, thank you.
Well, these are dedication prayers from our friend Shantideva. For as long as space endures, and for as long as living beings remain, until then, may I too abide to dispel the misery of the world. May all the pains of living creatures ripen solely upon myself, and through the might of the Bodhisattva Sangha, may all beings experience happiness. May the teachings, which are the sole medicine for suffering, and the origin of every joy, be materially supported and honored, and abide for a very long time. I prostrate to Manju Gosha, through whose kindness wholesome minds ensue. And I prostrate to my spiritual masters, through whose kindness I develop. Regular dedication prayers. Jang Trup Sen Cho Rin Poshe Ma Ke Pa Na Ke Gyorchi Ke Pa Nya Pa Me Pa Ya Go Ne Go
Gong Du
Wa Shu.
Wa Shu.
May my venerable Lama's life be firm, his white divine action spread in the 10 directions, dispelling the darkness of all beings in the 3 realms. Long life prayers for His Holiness, the Dalai Lama. The wish-granting, wish-fulfilling jewel, source of every single benefit and happiness in this world, the incomparably kind Tenzin Gyatso, I beseech, may all your holy wishes be spontaneously fulfilled. Gong Ri Ra Wei Kor Wei
Shin Kam Ye Pendang Dewa Malu Jung Wei Ne Chen Re Zi Wan Tenzin Gatso Yi Sha Pe Si Te Badu Tengu Ji.
Kyabje Zopa Rinpoche, you who uphold the subduer's moral way, serve as the bountiful bearer of all, sustaining, preserving, and spreading Manjana's victorious doctrine, who masterfully accomplished 3 magnificent prayers, honoring 3 joys. Savior of myself and others, your disciples, please live long. Tenzin Osel Hita. Venerable One, to you whose kindness exceeds that of all conquerors, for those wanderers in far places, especially the West, mindful of your loving concern for us, intentionally descending again to a family of a far distant land, make this request, Lama, please live long. Geshe Losang Doga, you with an immutable vow to spread to the limits of space, the Dharma of the able one in general, the Dharma of the pure-minded conqueror, supreme superior spiritual friend of unrepayable kindness, please remain for hundreds of eons and bestow the supreme and common cities. Geshe Tupten Shera, beloved teacher, leading students towards wisdom and compassion, explaining through exacting discernment the depths of the graduated path. You are the
You
unequal
are the
guide.
unequal guide.
Please live a long
live
and
a
stable
long,
life.
stable life.
Multiplying mantras. I'll do each one once. Chomdende, Dejin, Shigpa, Dra, Chompa Yang, Kampar, Zokpe, Sang, Ye, Kampar, Nang, Ze, Ho, Ki, Kelpyo, La, Chak, Sa, Jung, Jungchu, Sempa, Sempa, Chempo,
Kuntu,
Zopa, La,
Zangpo,
Chak,
La,
Sa,
Chag,
Lo,
Selo,
Dayata,
Tata,
Pancha,
Pencha,
Kriya,
Kriya,
Ava,
Ava,
Bodani,
Bodani,
Soha,
Swaha,
Om,
Om, Duru, Duru,
Jaya,
Jaya,
Ke,
Muke,
Soha.
Soha. Thank you very much. So I look forward to seeing you again, and take care.
Thank you very much.